The morning I heard my future son-in-law say, once we're married, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. I nearly ran my Lincoln Continental off Route 315. I adjusted the rearview mirror, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Julian Thornton sat in the back seat of my executive sedan, looking out the window, completely relaxed. He was talking to a business associate on his phone, sounding like he was discussing nothing more important than the weather. But he was talking about my daughter Clara. My name is George Vance. I'm 61 years old, and for 37 years I worked as a licensed building contractor in Columbus, Ohio. Decades crawling through damp crawl spaces and inspecting foundations leaves your joints stiff. When I retired 2 years ago, I thought I was ready for a quiet life. But after 6 months of pacing around the house and driving my wife Linda crazy, I realized I needed a reason to leave the house. Not for the money, we had built a comfortable nest egg, but for my own sanity. Driving a black Lincoln, I took corporate clients and lawyers to the airport or downtown offices. I wore the company-mandated black suit, dark sunglasses, and a matching cap. At the same time, extensive dental implant surgery required me to wear a mask to protect temporary bridge work. With the cap, sunglasses, and mask, my face was completely covered. Most passengers never looked at me. I was just a silent fixture of the car, and that was exactly how Julian Thornton saw me. Julian was a slick real estate broker in his early 30s who wore tailored suits and always smelled of expensive cologne. He became one of my regular passengers on Tuesday and Thursday mornings from his condo near Bridge Park. The first few times he rode in my back seat, I didn't think much of him. He was just another busy professional who spent his commute talking on his phone. Then, during our fourth ride together, I heard him mention a name that made my chest tighten. Clara. He was talking about her wedding registry. Over the next mile, the pieces fell into place. The voice, the company name, the wedding details. It was him, the man my daughter was scheduled to marry in 4 months. The strange part was that Julian had no idea who I was. We'd met twice at family dinners, but Julian was the type who occupied the entire room, talking constantly about his sales figures and golf handicap. He barely looked at me then, and certainly didn't register the quiet contractor at the end of the table. Now, with my face masked, I was completely invisible to him. At first, I found the situation almost funny. I told Linda about it that evening. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "You're telling me he sits 3 feet behind you and doesn't recognize his own future father-in-law?" she asked. "Not a clue," I replied, shaking my head. "To him, I'm just the driver." But the humor of the situation didn't last long. Driving Julian became increasingly uncomfortable. It wasn't that he was openly aggressive. It was the subtle things. The way he spoke down to the parking attendants, the way he dismissed his secretary on the phone, and the complete lack of warmth whenever Clara called him. He would answer her calls with a sigh, keep his answers short, and hang up as quickly as possible. Then came that rainy Tuesday morning on Route 315. We were heading south toward the downtown business district. Julian's phone rang, and he picked it up immediately. It was his business partner. "Yeah, I'm on my way," Julian said, leaning back. "Listen, we need to move fast on the Traverse City property. The developer wants the easement signed by next week." I kept my eyes on the road, but my ears perked up. Traverse City, Michigan, was where my late mother had owned a small, historic lakefront cottage. When she passed away, she left the property directly to Clara. It was a beautiful rustic place on West Grand Traverse Bay. Clara loved that cottage. It was filled with memories of her childhood, and she had always insisted she would never sell it. "I know Clara is stubborn about that place," Julian continued, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "She thinks it's some sacred family heirloom, but I've already set up the LLC. Once the wedding is over, I'll get her to sign the quitclaim deed. I'll tell her it's just standard paperwork to combine our assets for a better interest rate on our new house." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. "What if she reads it?" the voice on the other end apparently asked, because Julian let out a short, dismissive laugh. "She won't. Clara trusts me. She's a school counselor. She deals with teenagers and emotions all day. She doesn't know the first thing about real estate law or asset management. Besides, once we're married, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. By the time she realizes the cottage is in the LLC's name, the development project will already be approved. I sat in silence, my heart hammering. I wanted to slam on the brakes, pull over, drag him out of the back seat, and show him exactly what a retired contractor could do. But I didn't. I took a deep, slow breath, keeping the car steady in the middle lane. I needed to keep my mouth shut. I needed to listen. "And what about her father?" the partner asked. "George?" Julian scoffed. "He's a retired carpenter. The guy spends his weekends woodworking. He doesn't have the money or the brains to block this. I'll handle him. Once we transfer the title, there's nothing he can do anyway." Julian ended the call and slid his phone into his pocket, completely unaware that the retired carpenter was currently driving him at 65 miles per hour. When I pulled up to his office building, I stepped out and opened his door like I always did. "Thanks, driver," Julian said, not even looking at me as he grabbed his briefcase. "Have a productive day, Mr. Thornton," I said. He didn't reply. He just turned and walked into the building. I got back into the Lincoln, drove to a quiet parking lot, and shut off the engine. My hands were shaking. I pulled off my sunglasses and my mask, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't just angry, I was disgusted. Julian wasn't planning a marriage with my daughter. He was planning a hostile takeover, and he was counting on Clara's trust and my supposed ignorance to pull it off. I knew I couldn't just tell Clara. If I went to her with nothing but my word, she would defend him. I needed proof. When I got home that evening, the smell of pot roast filled the kitchen. Linda was by the stove, stirring carrots and potatoes. She took one look at my face, set her wooden spoon down, and sighed. "You look like you just checked a building foundation and found a sinkhole, George." "What happened?" I sat down at the kitchen table, running my calloused hands over my face. I didn't hold anything back. I told her about Route 315, about Julian's phone call, the Traverse City cottage, the LLC, and how Julian had laughed about my supposed ignorance. Linda listened in silence. The smile she usually carried was completely gone by the time I finished. She turned off the stove burner, wiped her hands on an apron, and sat opposite me. "Julian wants to take the cottage?" she asked quietly. "The one your mother cared for? He wants to put it in an LLC, I said, my voice tight. "He's planning to get Clara to sign a quitclaim deed right after the wedding, telling her it's just standard paperwork to combine our assets. He knows she won't read it. He calls her trust ignorance." Linda was quiet for a long moment, staring at the salt shaker on the table. "You can't just tell her, George," she finally said. "Why not?" I asked, my frustration bubbling up. "She's my daughter. I need to protect her from this snake, because you're her father, and she is in love," Linda said gently, placing her hand over mine. "If you walk in there and accuse Julian of plotting to steal her inheritance, she'll see it as an attack. She'll think you're trying to ruin her happiness because you don't trust her judgment. Julian will act like the victim and she'll pull away from us. We've seen how defensive Clara gets. You need facts, George. Real, undeniable facts." She was right, of course. Decades of working on construction sites had taught me that you don't call a building structurally unsound just because you don't like the color of the paint. You measure the tilt, you test the concrete, and you show the inspector the data. The next morning, I called my old friend Walter Aldridge. Walter was 62, a retired real estate lawyer, and someone I'd known since we were both building soapbox derby cars in grade school. We met at a local diner off Riverside Drive. The place was noisy, smelling of bacon and cheap coffee, which suited me fine. Walter listened to my story while nursing a mug of black coffee. When I finished explaining the LLC and the quitclaim deed, he leaned back in his booth and rubbed his chin. "Legally, a quitclaim deed is a powerful and dangerous thing, George," Walter explained. "It transfers whatever interest a person has in a property to someone else, immediately and without any warranties. If Clara signs a quitclaim deed transferring the Traverse City cottage to Julian's LLC, she's giving away her late grandmother's property. If he holds the majority share in that LLC, or if the LLC operating agreement is structured to give him sole management control, Clara won't own that cottage anymore. The LLC will, and Julian will control the LLC. Is that legal?" I asked. "If she signs it willingly, yes," Walter said. "Even if he misleads her about what it is, proving fraud after the fact is incredibly difficult and expensive. It's called fraud in the factum, tricking someone into signing a document that is different from what they think it is. But if she signs it, the damage is done. The property can be sold, mortgaged, or redeveloped before a court even sets a hearing date. Walter took a sip of his coffee. But there's something else. You said he mentioned a developer wanting an easement signed by next week? I nodded. Yes. He said they needed the easement to start the project. Walter frowned. Traverse City has strict zoning and environmental rules, especially near the bay. For a developer to get access to a property like Clara's cottage for heavy machinery or utilities, they need an easement. If the property is currently in Clara's name, she has to sign that easement. And since she inherited it through your mother's estate, the title company might also require your signature as the executor of the estate, depending on how the probate was finalized. But Clara hasn't signed anything, I said. And I certainly haven't. Walter's eyes narrowed. Then Julian has a major problem. He can't get the development project approved without that easement. If he's telling his business partner the easement will be signed next week, he's either planning to trick Clara into signing it early, or he's planning something much worse. Like what? Like forging the signatures, Walter said quietly. It happens more than you'd think in high-stakes real estate. If the developer is pushing and Julian stands to make a massive commission or equity share, the temptation is there. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Forgery. That was a felony. What do? I asked. Keep driving him, Walter said, and keep your ears open. In the meantime, I'll run a title search on the Traverse City property. I have access to the Michigan County Registry records. I'll check if any new documents or easements have been filed under Clara's name. For the next week, I fell back into the routine. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I picked up Julian. I wore my cap, my sunglasses, and my blue mask. I kept my mouth shut. I listened. Julian was busier than ever. His conversations were filled with financial terms, interest rates, and construction schedules. He was constantly calling a surveyor named Miller, pushing him to finalize the boundary drawings for the Traverse City project. Then, on a Thursday morning, the call came. Julian answered his phone, and his voice was filled with triumphant satisfaction. Miller, yeah, Julian said. We're good to go. The easement is signed. I've got the physical copy right here in my portfolio. I'll drop it off at the county recorder's office this afternoon. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Julian was tapping his fingers on a thick leather portfolio on his lap, a smug grin on his face. Clara didn't give you any trouble? The speaker mumbled. Julian chuckled. Clara doesn't even know what an easement is. I told her it was a temporary permission slip for a utility inspection. She signed it while she was making breakfast. I signed as the witness, and I had my notary at the office stamp it. My hands gripped the steering wheel. He was lying. I knew Clara had been at a school counseling conference in Cleveland for the last 3 days. She hadn't been home to make breakfast, and she hadn't signed any paperwork, which meant Julian had forged her signature, and likely mine too. The moment Julian disappeared into his office building, I pulled out my phone and dialed Walter. My voice was trembling. Walter, he just said it. He said he has the signed easement. He claimed Clara signed it while making breakfast. But she's been in Cleveland for 3 days. She isn't even in the city. A brief silence followed as Walter tapped on his keyboard. George, if Clara is out of town and she didn't sign it, and he says he has a signed and notarized easement, he has committed forgery. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 2913-31, forgery is a felony, especially when it involves property transactions and title deeds. Did he say who witnessed or notarized it? He said his office notary stamped it and he signed as a witness, and since it's my mother's estate, he likely forged my name as the executor too. Give me 2 hours, Walter said. If he submitted it to the county registry or the title company electronically, it might already be in the pending queue. I'll pull the document. 2 hours felt like 2 days. I parked the Lincoln in a quiet spot near the Scioto River, watching the muddy water flow past. I felt a mixture of cold anger and fear. Anger at Julian's arrogance and fear of how this would break Clara's heart. At 11:30, Walter called back. I've got it, George. It was uploaded to the title company's portal this morning. I've pulled a certified copy of the pending easement. It's exactly as you feared. Clara's signature is at the bottom. It's a crude imitation of her handwriting. But more importantly, your signature is on the witness line. And the notary stamp belongs to a clerk at Julian's real estate brokerage, a woman named Sarah Miller. Can you prove it's a forgery? I asked. Easily, Walter said. We have Clara's flight records, hotel bills, and conference registration in Cleveland. She was physically 140 miles away when this document was allegedly signed and notarized in Columbus. And you were driving for the executive car company. We have your GPS log showing you were on the road, not witnessing a property signing. The notary committed fraud, and Julian committed felony forgery. They've handed us the rope. I'm going to show this to Clara, I said, starting the engine. Wait, Walter warned. If you show her now, what happens? She's in love, George. She might confront Julian immediately. Julian is slick. He'll claim it was a clerical mix-up by his office assistant. He'll destroy the physical copy, accuse the notary of a mistake, and quickly cover his tracks. He might even pressure Clara to sign a new, real easement to save his career. If she signs a clean one now, the forgery charge evaporates and she still loses the cottage. You need him to commit to the fraud publicly, where he can't retract it. I hated to admit it, but Walter was right. Real estate developers and brokers like Julian knew how to wriggle out of tight spots if they had warning. I had to wait. I had to let him walk further into his own trap. That Sunday, Clara came over to our house for dinner. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She spent the first 20 minutes talking about her school counseling work, her eyes lighting up as she described a breakthrough she'd had with a troubled sophomore. Clara loved her job. She wasn't paid much, but she cared deeply about those kids. As we cleared the table, I tried to keep my voice casual. So, Julian's real estate business must be busy lately. He mention any new projects? Clara smiled, wiping down the counter. Actually, yes. He's been working really hard on some investment plans for us. He suggested we set up a family trust or an LLC to manage the Traverse City cottage. He said it's for tax optimization and protecting the property from probate laws. It sounded really smart. My chest tightened. Did he mention any development or easements? Clara looked at me, confused. Development? No, he said the cottage would stay exactly as it is, just under the trust name. Why do you ask? I hesitated. I looked at her trusting, tired eyes, and the urge to pull out the forged document from my briefcase was almost overwhelming. I just want you to be careful, Clara. Julian is a broker. He sees real estate as transactions. To you, that cottage is memories. To him, it's just land. Clara's smile faded. She set the sponge down, her shoulders turning tense. Dad, please, not this again. I'm just advising you to read everything before you sign it, I said, trying to soften my tone, especially if he brings you any LLC or quitclaim papers. I'm 29 years old, Dad, Clara said, her voice rising slightly. I'm a school counselor. I help families navigate crises every day. I know how to read a document. Why do you always assume I'm naive? Julian has been nothing but supportive. He's trying to build a future for us. Clara, I'm just saying. No, every time something good happens in my life, you look for the catch, she interrupted, her eyes shining with sudden tears. You've been distant and suspicious of Julian since the day we got engaged. If you can't be happy for me, just say so, but stop trying to ruin this. She grabbed her purse and walked out the back door before I could say another word. Linda walked into the kitchen, having heard the exchange from the living room. She came over and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head against my shoulder. It hurts, I whispered. I know, Linda said, but you're doing this to save her, George. Keep your head down. The truth will do the work. 2 days later, Julian got into my car for his Thursday morning ride. He looked ecstatic, talking loudly on his phone. It's all set. Julian told his business associate. We booked the grand ballroom at the Brookside Golf and Country Club for the engagement party next month. Nearly 100 guests are coming. I'm going to announce the Traverse City Luxury Development Project right there. It's the perfect stage. I'll present the approved plans as a surprise wedding gift for Clara. The local builders are already lined up to clear the land. I stared at the road ahead, my jaw clenched. A surprise wedding gift. He was planning to announce the destruction of Clara's beloved childhood cottage in front of 100 people, forcing her to smile and accept it under the pressure of a public crowd. He had no idea that I was carrying the certified copy of his forged easement in my glove compartment. And I had no intention of letting him clear that land. The weeks leading up to the engagement party were some of the longest of my life. Clara and I remained distant. She would answer my texts with short, polite replies, but the warmth was gone. Every time I heard her name, my chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice. I hated the silence, and I hated the fact that I was keeping such a massive secret from her. But every time I tempted myself to confess, I remembered Walter's warning. If I broke cover now, Julian would wriggle out, and Clara would still be in danger. So, I kept driving. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, I put on my mask, my sunglasses, and my cap, and I listened to Julian Thornton map out his perfect future. On one of those rides, he was discussing the prenuptial agreement with his attorney. "I don't care if it looks standard," Julian said, his voice sharp. "Make sure the waiver of premarital asset appreciation is ironclad. If the Traverse City LLC appreciates in value after the development, I want it explicitly stated that she has no claim to the equity increase. It's my LLC and my capital development. She gets the base value of the land at the time of marriage, nothing more, and put in a clause that gives me sole management authority over the LLC's real estate holdings." He was ensuring that even if Clara somehow discovered the development, she would have zero power to stop it, and if they ever divorced, he would walk away with the lion's share of her grandmother's land. The greed was calculated, cold and complete. Then, about a week before the party, something happened that almost made me break my composure. Julian climbed into the back of the Continental, looking relaxed. As we merged onto Interstate 270, he suddenly looked up and noticed me in the mirror. "You married, driver?" he asked casually. I was stunned. After nearly 6 months of sitting 3 feet behind me, he had finally realized I was a human being who might have a life outside the steering wheel. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice level. 35 years. Julian let out a whistle. "Wow, that's a long time. Any advice? I'm getting married in 4 months." For a second, the urge to tell him exactly what I thought of him was almost overwhelming. I wanted to tell him that marriage was about trust, partnership, and respect, concepts he couldn't comprehend. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Listen more than you talk." Julian chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "That's it? Sounds simple. It worked for me," I said. He smiled politely, then spent the next 15 minutes talking on his phone about his golf handicap and his latest real estate commission. He didn't listen to a word I'd said. He was incapable of it. The night before the engagement party, I met Walter at his office. He handed me a thick, sealed manila envelope. "Here is the package, George," Walter said, his face grave. "Inside is the certified copy of the forged easement, the flight and hotel records proving Clara was in Cleveland on the date of the alleged signing, and your GPS driving logs from that morning. I've also included the official state filing records for Julian's LLC. It shows he is the sole owner and manager. The trust he told Clara about doesn't exist. He has complete control. If she signs that quitclaim deed, she is giving him the cottage outright." I held the envelope in my hands. It felt heavy. "You're sure about the notary, Sarah Miller?" "She's already panicking," Walter said. "I had my notary assistant contact her office to request a copy of her notary journal entry for that signing. She couldn't provide it because it doesn't exist. When this blows up, she'll likely lose her license, and she'll testify against Julian to save herself from criminal charges. The trap is set." The engagement celebration was held on a warm Saturday evening in June at the Brookside Golf and Country Club. The ballroom was stunning. White linens, fresh hydrangeas, and soft amber lighting. A string quartet played near the entryway, and servers carried trays of champagne and appetizers. Almost 100 guests had gathered. Family, friends, Clara's coworkers, and Julian's real estate associates. Clara looked beautiful. She wore a simple white dress, her face glowing with excitement. When Linda and I walked in, she ran over and hugged us. For a brief second, the distance between us evaporated. I held my daughter close, smelling her familiar perfume, and my heart broke. I knew what I was about to do would shatter her evening, but I also knew it was the only way to save her life from a predator. Julian moved through the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing loudly, and making sure he was the center of attention. Several times, I saw him glance toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. He was building up to his big moment. At 7:30, everyone was seated and the room grew quiet. Julian stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone in one hand and a champagne glass in the other. Clara stood beside him, smiling warmly. Julian thanked everyone for coming, launching into a polished, charming speech. He spoke about how he and Clara had met, how much he loved her, and how excited he was to build a future together. People nodded, and a few of Clara's friends wiped away tears. Then, Julian's voice took on a theatrical tone. "I've always believed life rewards bold decisions," he said, turning to Clara. "Tonight, I wanted to give Clara a surprise that she will never forget, a symbol of our new beginning." Clara laughed softly, looking surprised. "What are you doing, Julian?" Julian turned to the crowd, his smile wide and confident. "As a surprise wedding gift, we are redeveloping Clara's Traverse City cottage into a luxury lakefront retreat. We've officially secured the easement to clear the land, and construction starts next week." The crowd gasped, and applause erupted from Julian's real estate partners. But Clara didn't clap. She didn't smile. She stood frozen, the color draining from her face. She turned to Julian, her voice picking up on the microphone. "What do you mean? Redeveloping it? Clearing the land?" The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Julian's smile wavered, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the microphone. "Clara, honey," Julian said, his voice carrying a nervous chuckle through the speakers. "It's a surprise, I told you. We're building a legacy. We talked about putting the cottage into a trust. We talked about protecting it," Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. "We never talked about redeveloping it. We never talked about clearing the land. That was my grandmother's house." "And how did you get an easement? I never signed anything." Julian swallowed hard, looking around the room at the 100 silent guests. "You signed it last week, remember? While you were making breakfast before my ride. I had it notarized at the office, and your dad signed as a witness. That was my cue. I stood up from our table. I didn't shout. I didn't make a dramatic entrance. I simply walked toward the stage, pulling off my suit jacket's company pin. Julian watched me approach, his brow furrowing. As I stepped into the light near the stage, he stared at my face, really stared. For the first time in 6 months, he wasn't looking through me. He was looking at me. I saw the moment of recognition hit him, the shape of my jaw, the eyes he had glanced at in his rearview mirror every Tuesday and Thursday morning, the voice he had dismissed. His face lost all its color. "George?" Julian whispered, the microphone catching it. "Wait, you're the driver?" "Yes, Julian," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I've been your driver for the last 6 months, and I've heard every single phone call." The ballroom erupted into hushed whispers. Clara looked between us, her eyes wide with confusion. "Dad, what is going on?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out the manila envelope, and handed it directly to her. "Clara, I love you. I didn't want to ruin your night, but you need to see the truth. Open it." Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. She pulled out the documents. On top was the certified copy of the easement Julian had uploaded to the title company. "That's my signature," she whispered, staring at the paper. "But I didn't sign this." "Look at the date, Clara," I said. "It was signed and notarized last Wednesday morning at 8:30. The notary stamp is from Julian's clerk, Sarah Miller. But last Wednesday morning, you were at a counseling conference in Cleveland. I have your hotel receipt and flight confirmation right there. And on the next page, you'll see my name on the witness line. But my company GPS logs prove I was driving a client to Dublin at that exact hour." Julian took a step forward, his hands gesturing frantically. "Clara, it's a mistake, a clerical error. Sarah must have mixed up the documents." "And the last document?" Clara asked, her voice dropping to a whisper as she turned to the final page. "The LLC registration. You told me we were setting up a family trust for the cottage. But this LLC is registered solely in your name, 100% ownership. I'm not even mentioned." Julian stopped talking. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The slick, confident real estate broker who had dominated every room he entered was gone. In his place stood a man caught red-handed in a felony. Clara stared at him. The tears in her eyes weren't from a broken heart. They were from a cold, hard clarity. "You never wanted a partnership, Julian," she said, her voice barely carrying. "You just wanted my grandmother's land, and you forged my father's name to get it." "Clara, please," Julian stammered, taking a step toward her. "I did it for us. The development will make us millions." "No," Clara said, stepping back. "You did it for yourself." Slowly, she slid the engagement ring off her finger. She didn't throw it. She didn't scream. She simply placed the diamond ring into Julian's limp hand. "I loved you," she said quietly, "but you never respected me." Julian stood on the stage for a few seconds, looking at the ring, then at the silent crowd. His real estate partners looked away, refusing to meet his eye. Realizing he had no moves left, Julian turned, walked off the stage, and exited the ballroom. Nobody stopped him. The silence followed him all the way out the door. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Claire was embarrassed, hurt, and angry. Some of that anger, naturally, was directed at me. She asked why I hadn't told her sooner, why I had played the silent driver for so long. I told her the truth, that I was afraid she wouldn't believe me without the proof, and that Julian would have slipped away. It took time, but she understood. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled. Julian's notary, Sarah Miller, lost her license, and Julian was facing formal charges for forgery under Ohio Revised Code, paragraph 2913.31. Clara had kept the Traverse City cottage, and she had recently enrolled in a graduate certification program she'd been putting off for years. She even bought a small townhouse of her own outside Columbus. One Sunday afternoon, she came over to our house for dinner, just like old times. The pot roast was in the oven, and the sound of cicadas came from the trees behind the patio. Claire and I were standing at the kitchen sink, washing the dinner dishes. She looked over at me, a soapy plate in her hand, and smiled. "You know, Dad. What's that?" I asked. "You were really annoying," she said, bumping my shoulder. "Extremely annoying." I laughed, rinsing the plate. "Only annoying? Well, maybe a little sneaky too," she admitted. "But thank you for keeping your eyes on the road." "Anytime, Clara," I said. Looking back, I realized something. Protecting your children doesn't mean fighting their battles or solving their problems for them. Sometimes it just means holding the mirror up so they can see the truth and trusting them to make the right choice. It's a hard road, and it risks everything. But when it's for the people you love, it's always worth it. Thanks for listening to my story.